say thank you for everybody being here and welcome. We'd like to call this public meeting to order. Purpose of the meeting tonight, I'm just going to read through basically the same advertisement that was put into the paper. It's a Pickens County, or a public hearing for Pickens County, the cities of Jasper, Nelson, and Talking Rock for an update on the comprehensive plan. Pickens County and the cities of Jasper, Nelson, and the town of Talking Rock are beginning a 5-year update of the joint comprehensive plan that was previously adopted in June of 2018. The plan update will be prepared according to the 2018 minimum planning standards set by Georgia Department of Community Affairs and the Georgia Planning Act of 1989. The initial public hearing, which we're here, is being held to explain the process for the plan preparation and the opportunities for public participation in the development of the updated plan. The affected governments intend to appoint citizens to participate in the Stakeholders Committee to work with planners in the plan preparation. In addition, broad citizen precipitation, it was raining earlier, so participation at every meeting related to the plan preparation is desired and recommended. So the more feedback we can get, the better we can do. The plan document, estimated for completion in draft for April 2023, will ultimately be submitted for review to the Northwest Georgia Regional Commission and the Georgia DCA. Plan approval by June 30th, 2023 is required to maintain qualified local government status for each local government per the Georgia Planning Act of 1989. Today, this evening, what we have basically got in store for us is we have a representative here, Mr. Ethan Calhoun from Northwest Georgia Regional Commission. This is going to come and kind of present this guideline, this process, this whole procedure so that we can get this going. This is a required first step for us to start, and then we will all begin working together to get these meetings all scheduled and get the stakeholders together. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Mr. Calhoun and let him come up. Anybody that can pull off as well as he can a seersucker suit deserves an opportunity to stand up in front of the crowd. So we thank you for coming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to pass around. We've got kind of a one-pager here. If y'all wanted to take this with you and look back just as a jog of memory on dates and information. And as this is coming around, I'm just going to hit some of these points. I'll go over here to the podium and walk you all through this process. So essentially, as the Chairman mentioned, we do this process every 5 years, and this began back around 1990 statewide. The Planning Act, of course, was passed in 1989 by the General Assembly, and what it enacted essentially was it set forth a process in order to create a standardized planning process all around the state, because that had not previously existed from a statewide perspective. And what it did was, or the reason for it, I should say, is that when cities and counties apply for funding, primarily federal and state funding, grants, things like that, the state wanted a better way to review grants and look at things competitively. So one of the ways the state measures communities and their ability to plan and to carry out and implement those plans is that Georgia Planning Act. And of course, just like any legislation, it has changed numerous times over the past 30 years, and now our most recent update was done in 2018. And basically what we have to do through this process, first of course, is to hold this initial public hearing to make the public aware that the county and the cities are going to be going through this process and are going to be reaching out to get input both from the cities and county officials. We form a steering committee. Those are oftentimes made up of the professionals and elected officials of each community, city and county, and begin to work on some of the basic needs, and then to reach out to the public for input through various ways. And one of those ways is to, of course, do a survey. We'll usually put one of those together to reach out and get general public input early on in the process, kind of form some thought and form some direction. And then we'll work on putting together a stakeholder committee. The stakeholder committee is, of course, made up of stakeholders in the community. We call skin in the game, as you might say. And so what we look for a lot of times in stakeholders are people who are residents, business owners, and folks like that, and of course volunteers and community leaders outside of government to participate and to bring that perspective to this process. And so that gives us a broad view of input from around the community. And of course, the Regional Commission, our role in that. How many folks in here know what the Northwest Georgia Regional Commission is? Okay, well, I'm impressed. There's quite a few hands. So for those of you that don't know what the Regional Commission is, we were founded back in the early 1960s. In fact, North Georgia was the first regional commission in the entire state. And it was kind of a model at the time. And what it was a collaborative effort between local governments, cities and counties to get together and combine resources and fund an office that could work on long-term strategic planning and economic development to help write grants and plans for local governments, and also work on ordinances and things like that. So basically help guide development with cities and counties in Northwest Georgia. And again, we were one of the first in the state, and it was became so successful that the governor at the time, I believe it was Ernest Vandiver, decided to make that a statewide system. And so, of course, now there are 12 regional commissions, Northwest Georgia being 15 counties and 49 cities. And we have 2 offices in Rome, in our original Coosa Valley office, and 1 in Dalton. And so those are the offices that we work out of. And so we work on all sorts of things, from grants to plans to ordinances, and essentially work as a technical extension of a local city and county government, though we do receive a fair amount of our funding from the state and federal government. But we like to say that we're essentially an extension of local staff, whereas we're here to help work at the local level. We are not an authority or anything of any sort. We're here to assist and to make sure things can move forward. These comprehensive plans being one of our key responsibilities to ensure that these are done correctly from the state standpoint, and make sure they're done on time. And we also come back to work with implementation and assist in grant writing and identification of funding to help make sure that the goals and the projects that come out of these plans can be implemented over time. And again, these plans have to be updated every 5 years. That's part of the state law. And essentially, we have to go through this same exact process every 5 years to measure the progress from the previous 5-year plan, and then, of course, to identify new projects and goals and things like that moving forward. And so, again, in order for us to go through this process, step 1 we're accomplishing tonight. Step 2 will be to put together those committees, which will be done at the local level. Each city and county will select and appoint the members of the steering and stakeholder committees. And then we'll begin to work through this process and go through each item. And for those of you, I believe these have made their way around the room now, our goal, our time that we have to have this plan complete by is June 30th of 2023. So we have just under 1 year to accomplish this, and that's a pretty good timeline. We're getting right on schedule. And what we have to do through this process as part of the committees is first identify goals. So we start by looking at the previous plan and to decide what goals, what needs, and what opportunities were in that plan from 5 years ago that are still relevant. And we look at what progress has been made in regard to those goals and opportunities. And then we identify, of course, new goals, new opportunities that were not in that plan previously, and of course, needs of each local government. Once those have been identified, we work through the process to put together a list of projects, and it's called the Community Work Program. That's a 5-year schedule of projects where we identify funding sources, estimate cost for those projects within that list, and what those particular needs are. And the way we get those, again, is through the steering committee and the stakeholder committee's input as to what projects and what focus areas this plan needs to be directed towards. And once those are put together, again, the report of accomplishments is the 5-year sort of checklist progress report from the last 5 years, where we go through, determine which projects that were set forth to be completed within the last 5 years, which projects have been completed, which projects are underway, which projects may have been dropped or may be, need to be postponed for one reason, funding, things like that. Of course, no one could have anticipated 5 years ago that we would have been dealing with a global pandemic, so that certainly has affected folks and projects across the region, state, the country, of course. So things like that we have to take into consideration and make note of in this plan. And of course, we have another a new element to this plan, which we actually have been working with Pickens County and cities, Jasper, Nelson, Talking Rock, to update the previous comprehensive plan to include a broadband element. And this broadband element was a requirement that the state, the legislature put forth back in 2018. So now it's a part of each city and county's minimum standard for planning to include an element on broadband internet and how to improve that access to broadband internet in every community throughout the state. So we've already done some base work on that, and we'll continue to do that work moving forward in this plan. That is now a required element as part of this plan. We do have optional elements because Pickens County is a higher tax credit. It's not required that we do economic development as part of this comprehensive plan. However, if the need is seen with the steering and stakeholder committees and the local level that we need to include that information in the plan, we will of course put together an element on economic development and add that to this plan as well. Housing and transportation are also elements of this plan that we can assess in looking at, of course, transportation needs and projects, as well as housing, which of course is a national issue now. And I think, I'm sure Pickens County is similar to many of our other communities in the region. The growth, residential growth, if it's not happening right now, it is certainly on its way. So planning for housing development and infrastructure development to support that can be part of this plan as well. And what we do through this process in putting this draft together, we meet with those committees, we put these items together, we meet with the local governments who at the end of the day, after all the committees have reviewed everything, will select what projects will be in the final plan. And we put all this together in a draft form for the comprehensive plan for public consumption, and we make that available to the public. We expect to have this plan completed by March of 2023, have a draft form in hand for distribution, both for public consumption as well as the local governments to give a final review. We'll hear additional comment at that point through various avenues, from a final public hearing, which will likely take place sometime in March. In order to get this plan to the Department of Community Affairs for their review, they have to ensure that we did follow all the procedures and make sure that we did give, of course, all the opportunities for public input, because that is a paramount piece of the process in the comprehensive plan, to make sure that we have gotten a fair amount of public input and given an opportunity for the public to engage. One of the elements of this plan that a lot of folks find most impactful is the land use section and the land use element. And that land use goes back again and relates to things like housing and development, both industrial, commercial, residential. And that's where the communities each will have their own land use element. And that is where each community will plan where growth can occur, what density of growth should be approved or should be allowed in the different specific areas of each community. Think of it sort of like, for instance, zoning. Anytime you have any zoning decision by state law, the zoning procedures law, the comprehensive plan must be one of the factors that are used to analyze each zoning decision. And so it's very, very important that the land use section, land use element of the comprehensive plan is given a significant amount of attention, because that has a lot to do with future zoning decisions and future development and infrastructure planning and so forth. So we'll have a lot of maps as part of this process for folks to look at, again, for each jurisdiction, to look at growth and development moving forward. And while this is a 5-year plan where we look at a scope of projects over 5 years, these plans oftentimes are looking much further into the future, more like 20 or 25 years in population growth and development. So the land use section, again, is one of those that is looking, of course, further than 5 years in the future. So that is a very significant part of this process. We want to make sure that there's plenty of opportunity to gather input on that, both from a standpoint of survey and in public meetings, to opportunity for folks to be able to look at maps and see what type of development is being planned in their specific part of their community. So the land use section, the broadband element, the community work program, again, those are the capital projects, the investment type projects that we'll be looking over. Again, each local government will have their own section of this plan. It is a joint comprehensive plan, which means that public hearing and stakeholder committees can take place jointly and gather resources and put this together in a single document. But make no mistake, each community will have their own section of this plan and will have full decision in what is made a part of this plan. And so while the Regional Commission is here to assist, we of course don't mandate anything or include anything. We're here to facilitate this process, make sure it gets done correctly and on time, and we'll be here to assist in technical assistance from mapping to narrative and authorship of this plan. And I'm here tonight representing the Regional Commission and will be a point person as the Assistant Planning Director. But the project lead for this plan will be Alex Smith. He couldn't be here tonight for the public hearing, but he will be the project lead for this and be doing a lot of the outreach and contact and handling the meetings moving forward. Again, this goes to the Department of Community Affairs. Once that draft is complete, once we've received our feedback, we'll come back to do a final public hearing. And unlike this meeting, there'll actually be things to present. There'll be a draft in hand. We'll have the maps completed and all those projects identified. And one more opportunity for the public to review that complete draft of the plan and give any additional feedback prior to the local governments transmitting this plan to the Department of Community Affairs and to the Regional Commission, where we will send it to the Department of Community Affairs, and that is where they'll review it again to make sure that we followed all of the procedures and did everything correctly, and that generally takes about 1 month. So when we get that plan back April, May, then we will plan to have that back before the Board of Commissioners and each of the mayor and councils of each city to approve the final draft of the comprehensive plan and get that approved by June 30th, and that will meet that qualified local government status. And again, one of the most significant reasons is why we do this process. I mentioned earlier that it was a measurement tool for the state to look at implementation and planning across the state. But the key factor I left out a moment ago is that if these plans are not completed or are not done to the state standards, then local governments would lose that QLG, qualified local government status, and they would be ineligible for any state or federal permitting, grants, or loans, which could be a pretty significant detriment to local government. So that is why the Regional Commission, one of the reasons why the Regional Commission is so engaged in this process, because we know the value in maintaining that qualified local government status. So once that is adopted, that QLG will be extended for another 5 years, and we'll of course have that plan to implement over that 5-year period. And at any point in the middle of the 5-year period, if things come up, if we need to make amendments or additions, as we did in the previous couple of years when we made the broadband element amendment, we can of course amend this plan and update it at any time, whether it's for land use or specific strategic projects. And again, we can amend that at any time. So this is not set in stone for 5 years, but it does meet that minimum standard. And Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thank you. Open up the floor. Anyone that has any questions for moving forward? And we have our marching orders. Go ahead, Mr. Proctor.
Ethan, always good to see you. Is this an abbreviated kind of process relative to the 10-year plan? It seemed like, I know the steering committees can have public meetings. It seemed like we had quite a few more public meetings when we went through it a few years ago.
That's an excellent question, and essentially, we're only required to have about 1 or 2 stakeholder meetings. And so what that means is that each local government or the joint body of governments can choose to have as many public hearings as part of this process, or as many public meetings as part of this process, steering and stakeholder, as they deem necessary. And the Regional Commission, of course, will be glad to help facilitate as many meetings as deemed necessary through this process. And essentially, this process is exactly the same from a procedural standpoint on a 5-year schedule as a 10-year schedule, while they do still call the 5 and 10-year plans.
Okay. Thanks, sir.
Thank you. I know with with the city here. The county, from our perspective, will be appointing the steering committee in August. In our meeting, we'll have our steering committee to work with yours. So I know that you can put that on your schedule for whenever it feels appropriate. We can get those two groups together and reach out to Nelson and Talking Rock. I didn't see when we first started. Okay. We'll make sure to get with each to make sure that we get those steering committees appointed to where that team is in unified. So, from our side. Any other questions? All right. Well, with that, we will adjourn the public hearing portion. Thank you, Ethan, again for coming over. I know it's a long drive for a short meeting, but we really do appreciate you guys coming in the system. Prepared to go into our regular meeting at 5:30.